There's a weight you've carried for so long, it started to feel like part of who you are. You couldn't name it, not exactly. It wasn't panic, it wasn't pressure. It was quieter, heavier, like a silence that echoes in your bones. A weariness that doesn't sit in your muscles, but in your soul. You've stretched yourself thin to meet expectations that were never yours. And in the process, you've forgotten what it feels like to stand in your own truth. Even worse, you've mistaken that emptiness for normal. You were raised to keep the peace, taught to be agreeable, to be kind even when it has cost you pieces of yourself. You thought that if you just stayed soft, if you gave people grace, love would come back to you. But instead, you became the emotional landfill, the place where others dumped their fears, their anger, their wounds. You absorbed it all, quietly, stoically, until now, when something hurts, you doubt your own reaction. You tell yourself, maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I'm just too sensitive. But you're not. That discomfort you're feeling, it's your inner self screaming for air. Not weak, not dramatic, just unheard. Carl Jung, one of the deepest thinkers of the psyche, devoted his life to the idea that the human shadow, the unspoken, denied parts of ourselves, holds the key to healing. And what he found was chilling. Our deepest suffering rarely comes from loud trauma. It comes from the soft betrayals. The 1,000 tiny moments when we said yes but meant no. When we smiled while breaking inside. When we let someone cross a line we never knew we needed to defend. Jung said, what we do not confront, we are doomed to carry. And what we carry becomes the weight that breaks us. This isn't about self-pity. This is about self-recovery. Because some wounds don't scream, they whisper. And those are the hardest to recognize, especially when they come wearing the mask of love. You've been shaped by behavior that didn't announce itself as harm. It came in the form of jokes, suggestions. Why are you being so sensitive? If you really loved me, you'd do this. Little things that made you question your memory, your feelings, your reality. And the worst part? It often comes from those closest to you. People confuse loyalty with silence, patience with self-abandonment. And you start believing that love means sacrificing your truth. But Jung warned us again. People will go to absurd lengths to avoid facing their inner world. They will twist others to avoid seeing themselves, because looking inward is terrifying. Owning your fear, your envy, your regret, it requires real courage. And most people would rather reshape you than reshape themselves. So what do? They guilt you, they undermine your confidence, they turn your light down, so theirs feels less dim. Not because you're wrong, but because your clarity threatens their illusion. And here's where things get dangerous. They don't need to yell. They don't need to slam doors or use harsh words. All they need to do is make you question yourself. You'll start apologizing for things you didn't do. You'll make yourself small to avoid arguments. You'll begin to monitor your joy, your tone, your dreams, afraid they'll trigger someone else's insecurity. That is not a relationship. That is control by erosion. And Jung had a name for the solution: individuation. The process of becoming whole, reclaiming the broken, denied, abandoned pieces of yourself. But you cannot become whole in a space where you must fracture to survive. If your body tenses when they enter the room, If your soul quiets when you speak to them, that's not peace. That's suppression. And when you resist that suppression, when your instincts rebel, they'll accuse you of changing, of being distant, cold, selfish. Not because it's true, but because your awakening disrupts their script. So you start over-explaining. You try to reason. But now your truth becomes twisted. Your silence gets used as proof. Your boundaries become betrayal. It's not a conversation anymore. It's theater. And you're cast as the villain. That's when guilt walks in. Not real guilt. Manufactured guilt. The kind that makes you apologize. Not because you were wrong, but because you were emotionally punished for being real. And they do it all with a smile. This is how you lose yourself. Not all at once, but piece by piece. One silence, one favor, one swallowed truth at a time. Love doesn't look like that. Love does not gaslight your instincts. Love does not erase your edges. Love does not shame your soul for asking to be seen. Jung warned us again. When people refuse to heal their pain, they project it outward. And when you're in the blast zone of that projection, it becomes your prison, because some people don't want healing. They want power. They don't want truth. They want control over the story and over you. And the moment you begin to wake up, they call it betrayal. But it's not betrayal. It's birth. You're not distant. You're discerning. You're not cold. You're clear. And clarity is what manipulation fears most. And when clarity arrives, something deeper shows up. Contempt. Not rage. Not argument, but absence. Suddenly, they vanish emotionally. They stop responding. You speak, and they ignore. And in that quiet void, they communicate the cruelest lie. You don't matter. This is not conflict. This is spiritual starvation. You shrink until you forget what wholeness even felt like. And then the myth appears that love must hurt, that real loyalty is quiet suffering, that maturity is staying silent. But suffering is not maturity, and shrinking is not love. You become the fixer, the saint, the one who endures, until even your pain becomes a point of pride. But pride in silence is still silence, and silence without self-respect is still decay. This is what Jung called psychic death, not of the body, but of your soul's potential. You stop imagining, stop reaching, you just endure. But here's the radical, painful, beautiful truth. You don't owe anyone your destruction, not your partner, not your past, not your culture, not even your trauma. You were never put here to disappear. You were not meant to be loved only when you're convenient, only when you're quiet, only when you're useful. You were meant to live, to speak, to create, to be whole. And yes, walking away from those illusions will hurt. But what you're really leaving was never love. It was confusion. And the moment you choose clarity, a new silence begins. Not the silence of punishment, but the silence of peace, of self-return, of homecoming. Jung didn't write to comfort. He wrote to awaken. And that's what this is. Not advice, not a diagnosis, a mirror. And if even one part of you feels like something cracked open, let it. Let the light in. Let yourself back in. Because this isn't your ending. This is your beginning.